Welcome back, everyone, to episode 5 of our look at the story of the Easter Rising in 1916. I believe this is the final episode. At least it's the final one that's been released so far. I guess we'll see if there's a part 6, but I think this is it. Anyway, by the time you guys are watching this, Mrs. VTH and I will be somewhere over the Great Plains of the United States on our way to Denver for the weekend. Be watching for a separate video that'll give you the information about the meetup opportunity that's happening this weekend. We're going to be a part of a big group of educational YouTubers, history YouTubers, specifically some of, not all, our history, that are going to be there. And you'll have a chance to not only meet me and the missus, but also many of them. So last I knew, Cynical Historian's going to be there, Genie a Vlogger, Tim from Drawn of History, Drew Durnall, myself, Mr. Beat, Will from Knowing Better, Arvin Ash, Grant from Casual Historian, Willie from Canubis, Kalen, Atlas Pro. I think that's pretty much everybody else. Kristen from Molecular Memory, and Julian O'Shea. So that was the list last I was aware. So assuming they're all still coming, but there is going to be a meetup this weekend for all of us. You have a chance to meet any and all of us that you wish to, but I'll post a separate video about that. But let's go ahead and dive in to part 5. As always, the link is in the description if you haven't seen the first 4 episodes, and if you want to watch it without my commentary. At the very least, go over, give them a like, leave them a comment, and let them know that you're supporting what it is that they are doing. Let's go ahead and dive in to the last part.
Dublin, Ireland, May 3rd, 1916. It's so early in the morning, it's still dark outside. Patrick Pearse sits in his cell, quiet and contemplative, and he's just finished writing final letters to his mother and brother. A Roman Catholic priest is admitted by the guards, and Pearse bows his head to receive last rites. Shortly after, more soldiers arrive to escort him outside. He then marches to the end of the jail yard, a narrow space hemmed in by high, rough stone walls. He is then blindfolded, and a white marker tied around his chest. The execution detail lines up 12 steps away. Pearse faces them, and the orders ring out. Ready! Aim! Fire!
Now, I actually just did a podcast that went live today about military executions during the First World War, because I went to the site of some of those executions in the town of Poppering in Belgium. And I visited a cemetery where more British military executed bodies lie than any other cemetery on the Western Front. There's 17 of them in the Poppering New Cemetery. So I'll have a video coming about that as well. But typically, I can't say for sure if it was done the same way with these Irish rebels, but typically it would have been a team of 12 enlisted men. They would have laid down their rifles and been marched off, while an officer would then load 10 of the 12 with live rounds, 2 with blanks, and then they would bring them back in, give them to order the fire, and then afterwards either the sergeant that was a part of that squad or an officer would do what they call the coup de grace and put a bullet in the head of the condemned to make sure they were dead. I don't know about tying a white something all the way around their entire body, but they typically would pin a white handkerchief over the heart as a place for them to aim.
In a nearby cell, Patrick Pearse's younger brother William hears the echoing report of his brother's execution. In less than 24 hours, he will stand in the same spot and suffer the same fate. Thanks so much to HelloFresh for continuing to help us bring history to the table. In the aftermath of the Easter Rising, British authorities arrested thousands of Irish nationalists. Crowds of Dubliners jeered as some British soldiers led them off, calling them murderers for the bloodshed they'd brought into the city streets. Army courts tried a total of 187 nationalists in legal proceedings that broke a number of British laws. They were held in private, without allowing the accused any legal defense, and some of the military officers serving as judges had even fought against the Rising.
So, not surprised by that. Same thing happened in the United States in the aftermath of the American Civil War. Military tribunals to try civilians, even though courts ruled you can't do that sort of thing, and there were all kinds of reasons why it was not okay. In the midst of rebellion, people tend to look the other way at the government doing things that it shouldn't normally be allowed to do. And it seems like that was the case. See, I'm not trying to justify it or anything like that. I'm just saying this is a pretty common thing that powerful governments do in the aftermath of rebellion. They tend to bend, if not completely break, the law in how they deal with it.
Due to the imposition of martial law, the British military commander in Ireland, General Sir John Maxwell, knew he'd be able to punish the rebels with impunity. He was assisted in this by General Charles Blackadder, and both men were determined to punish the nationalists as swiftly as possible, regardless of public opinion or even the will of the government. Of the 187 men tried, 90 were sentenced to death, 75 of which eventually had their sentences commuted, but 14 suffered the ultimate punishment, with firing squads conducting the grim work in the yard of Kilmainham jail. Patrick.
I think there was one guy who was sentenced to death, but the sentence wasn't carried out because he was an American citizen, and they didn't want to tick off the Americans, I think.
Pierce was shot on the first day of the executions. 2 other nationalists died within minutes of him, and 4 others, including William Pierce, were shot the day after. And for 5 days, between May 3rd and May 12th, the rifles boomed, with each of the rebels facing death without flinching. Now, Maxwell claimed that only the ringleaders of the rising and those who had killed in cold blood were executed, but that wasn't entirely true. William Pierce, for example, had only worked as his brother's aide, had not been involved in planning or leading the rebellion, nor had he killed anyone. Nevertheless, he suffered his brother's fate. As the executions continued, the public's mood began to markedly change. Apathy toward the...
See, I'm sure there was a reason why they did them a few at a time instead of all at once, but I can see why that would backfire. Like, do it all at once, get it out of the way, and then maybe public opinion doesn't turn against it, but day after day after day, it's in the news. 3 more. And maybe that's why they did it that way. Maybe that's what they were hoping for, was to keep it in the news, to really press home, don't do this. So maybe it was intentional and it backfired. I don't know.
The rising was replaced by dismay at the military's actions, both in suppressing the revolt and the clearly unfair trials. Stoked by international pressure and members of the press sympathetic to the nationalist cause, this unrest quickly swelled into a fury. While most of Ireland hadn't wished to take up armed struggle, there was still widespread sympathy for the nationalist cause, and this rapidly translated into sympathy for these failed rebels. On the other side of things, the British government was similarly concerned with General Maxwell's handling of the affair, because it was feared that as they killed the rebels one by one, the leaders of this rising were being transmuted into martyrs. Meaning in death, the rebellion...
There's something to be said for showing lenience in that situation. And had that happened maybe a few decades later, maybe that would have been the case, but it certainly wasn't the case at this time. During a time of war already, I can't imagine the British government handling this any other way, but you can see how maybe in the end creating martyrs out of them would be a problem.
And its leaders were achieving what they'd failed to do in life, rousing Ireland to rebellion. By May 12th, even Unionist Irish politicians were calling for the executions to stop. On that day, James Connolly faced the firing squad, the 14th nationalist to do so. And, due to public pressure, he would be the last, at least for the time being. But as the echoes of that final rifle volley faded within Kilmainham's stone walls, the silence left suggested not an ending, but a new beginning. In August, the diplomat Roger Casement was also sentenced to death. Despite not having taken up arms himself in the Rising, his work procuring weapons and recruits in America and Germany saw him convicted of treason. Oddly enough, an obscure legal loophole relating to the placement of a specific comma in a statute was used to ensure a death sentence, to which Casement commented wryly that he was to be hanged on a comma. He was executed August 3rd. In the aftermath of these executions, one group quickly moved to harness this general sense of anger and injustice and tie it to specific political goals. The Sinn Fein party had been founded in 1905 as a moderate nationalist party. Originally.
Interesting, Sinn Fein is seen as the moderate nationalist party because in decades to come, they're going to be seen as one of the more radical parties.
They'd advocated for an Ireland that was independent from Great Britain, but that also remained part of the British Empire, retaining the monarchy. But by 1916...
And there's precedent for that. I mean, look at Australia, New Zealand, Canada, they all have retained, my darn chair, they have all retained the monarchy, but have their own government. And there's talk that if Scotland goes ahead and breaks away from the United Kingdom, that they would go back basically to the status they had before the 1700s, where they were under a joint union of the crown, but a separate government.
Both the attitude and goals of the party had changed. Many members of the Irish Volunteers and the Irish Republican Brotherhood were also members of Sinn Fein, and the party was seen, wrongly to an extent, as the driving force behind militant republicanism. So Sinn Fein chose to capitalize on this misconception, and in 1917, they pivoted to an avowedly Republican stance. A move for which they were awarded with victory of 73 out of Ireland's 105 parliamentary seats in the 1918 general election. And for some, the victory of a Republican Party was a green light to take up arms once again. Near Ballyvourney, Ireland, July 7th, 1918.
So again, context here. We are in the final months of the Great War, World War I. July 7th is right on the heels of what was known as the Kaiserschlacht offensive, the spring offensive by the Germans. It was the Germans' last-ditch effort to take Paris, to divide the British and French armies, and force a negotiated settlement before the Americans can arrive in force, because the Americans are arriving tens of thousands at a time, and they're very quickly building up to where the Americans are going to have 1 million or 2 men on the Western Front. And so the Germans are trying to end the war as quickly as they can, but this has fizzled out by this point, and now you're about to get an Allied offensive that's called the 100 Days Offensive that's going to kind of seal the victory. So we're right at about that time where that's going to start happening.
Sunlight dapples the Irish countryside as two policemen of the Royal Irish Constabulary walk along a quiet lane. They've just left the village of Ballyvourney, having attempted to stop an illegal gathering. But as they pass through the mouth of the glen, gunshots ring out. Several figures leap from the surrounding hedgerows and assail the two policemen. One is shot in the neck, the other is thrown into the dirt and beaten. His attackers identify themselves as Irish volunteers. The nationalists take the carbines and ammunition carried by the police and leave them in the roadway. And this is only the beginning. For the Easter Rising may be in the past, but after the executions and the rise of Sinn Fein, the nationalist cause has never been stronger. That ambush was the first time the nationalists had fired on the police since the end of the Rising, and it signaled further violence ahead. Buoyed by election success, Sinn Fein and its adherents prepared for an armed uprising that would eclipse that of 1916.
So it's interesting to see that they're resorting to violence because they've made political success. And I'm sure there were probably people within the government there who were saying, listen, let us do this in a different way. Let's try and win the people to our side politically. But maybe they thought that they needed the extra pressure, and that both political and in a way of violence was going to be the means by which they would achieve this.
In early 1919, an uprising that became known as the Irish War of Independence flared throughout Ireland.
And at this point now, you're talking about the outbreak of Spanish flu, right? By the time we're into 1919, I don't know if they'll touch on that at all, but that's going to add to all of this, is that you're dealing with a worldwide pandemic that killed maybe as much as 5% of the world's population.
Nationalists waged a guerrilla campaign, resulting in around 2,300 dead, nearly half of them civilians.
Wow.
But despite the British government responding with aggressive tactics, it soon became clear that this time, Ireland would have to be granted its independence. Though less than a year later, a second war was raging, this one a civil war among Irish nationalists. One faction consisted of Republicans, while the other comprised those who wanted Ireland to remain part of the British Empire, even though by then it was no longer part of the United Kingdom.
So it's interesting to see that happen, because this is a pretty common thing that happens, is once you've dealt with the enemy that you all agree on, now those factions that we saw all the way back at the beginning are now fighting with each other. Same thing's happening at this point in Russia. You've got the Bolsheviks fighting, against the people who want to have a democratic government. So you've got communism, democracy. They all worked to overthrow the monarchy that existed, but now they're fighting about what's our future going to look like.
And after a year of fighting that proved just as bloody as the War of Independence, the Republicans were defeated and the Irish Free State born. In the aftermath of all of that conflict, the Easter Rising itself remains difficult to categorize. To some, it was nothing less than the realization of centuries of struggle against imperial domination, often rhetorically intertwined with the Roman Catholic symbolism of Easter. It's seen as a righteous rebellion by brave men who fought to the end and whose martyrdom paved the way for Irish independence. But there's also an opposite view, which holds that the rebellion itself was unnecessary. Ireland had been working its way steadily towards self-determination, and it seemed likely that independence could have been achieved, eventually, without resorting to widespread bloodshed. Even some Republicans have viewed the likes of James Connolly as akin to a hate preacher who brought violence down on the people of Dublin, and prior to the execution.
So I'm curious, those of you who follow this channel who live in Ireland, how are these people viewed today? How is all of this viewed by the people that you know? How do you view it? I would love to hear from some of our Irish followers to know what the kind of the view of all of this is today.
Ireland's apathy toward the Rising showed that there was little appetite then for armed struggle. As is so often the case, the truth is complex, and attitudes in Ireland toward the Rising have swayed back and forth over the past century. Sometimes it's an anniversary that has been commemorated and celebrated, while at other times it's been regulated to a minor remembrance. But perhaps the Rising's violent legacy is best understood through a single...
Did he say it's been regulated? I think he probably meant relegated. I don't know. I do that all the time, guys. We all say words we didn't mean. We all read things wrong. We all make mistakes. I'm not making a big deal of it because I do it probably at least once a video.
Bloody incident. On April 26, 1916, while fighting raged in Dublin, a British officer, Captain John Bowen Colthurst, had 6 civilians murdered. Colthurst, a veteran of the Boer War and World War I, who may have been suffering from PTSD, claimed that he thought the cold-blooded executions were, quote, the right thing to do. He was later arrested, but escaped long-term punishment with an insanity plea. Now, the widow of one of his victims described Colthurst as the Englishman with the veneer removed. But here's the thing. Colthurst wasn't English. He was an Irishman born and raised in Cork. Such incidents serve as a stark reminder of what can happen during times of revolution and the harsh realities that are often left out of founding myths. For while many Irishmen and women were willing to fight and die for their independence from Britain, tragically, many of the people they fought were often their own. Well, Zoe,
that was good stuff. I confess I don't know nearly enough about Irish history, and I've got Irish roots like a lot of Americans do. Definitely hope to get an opportunity to visit both Ireland and Northern Ireland someday. But yeah, I would love to hear, especially from you folks who live in Ireland, how is this stuff viewed today? Let me know in the comment section below, and be watching for my latest video from Martyrdom, which is a companion to JD at the History Underground, his video about the sunken lane. I'll be showing the Union perspective for that, and be watching for the announcement about the get-together this weekend. And you might see some stuff either on Instagram or here on the channel that we might do together, me and all the folks that are going to be getting together this weekend. So hopefully we'll see that soon. Thanks for watching.